spiritually stolen. We pay respects to elders past and present. Metro Arts invites you to join in our commitment to knowing our Native communities in more meaningful ways in alignment with our restorative arts practice. Thank you. With that said, I will move into the public comment section of our meeting. I don't believe we have any public comment that was sent in. I'm not seeing anyone here in person. I'll double check with Chuck. Oh. Thank you. So we do not have any public comment. I guess for the record, we have been trying to change our meeting times and kind of adjusting to when people might be available. So we're meeting today at 5 p.m. on a Friday. So I say to anyone who might be watching, we hope that you will come and participate and hear and make public comments. And we'll try to continue to make that easier for you all who might be tuned in. So thank you. With that being said, I will move on to agenda item C, the approval of the last minutes. To all of the committee members, you should see last meeting minutes in your packet from May 24th. I will give everyone a chance to review that briefly. If you need more time, please let me know, and then I will call for its approval. I'm not going to pause so everybody can read the whole thing, but if you do one more time, let me know. I will entertain a motion to approve the meeting minutes from last meeting.
Second.
Awesome. So Terry has made the motion. Heather has made the second. And I guess now we'll call for a vote. All those in favor of approving last meeting's minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Thank you. So we've approved the meeting minutes from last meeting, so we can move on to agenda item D. This is our section where the bulk of our discussion will come from with action items and discussion. The first item up for discussion is our confirming of a co-chair appointment. So I will do my best to kind of guide us into this conversation. But yeah, if there are any comments or questions, please stop me. So previously, Terry McCormick served as our co-chair, our community co-chair. As our guidelines are written, and as the intention of CARE was when it was created was to kind of divide, the more so to put more authority in the community's hands in this body. So in our guidelines, it does say we're supposed to have a community co-chair along with the commissioner serving as chair. We recognize that, Terry had to step away for a little bit and has recently returned. But it has been not officially recognized that she's returned as chair. So I think we need to discuss that today. I think one of the options is that, I completely understand that I am not supposed to be the sole chair of this committee. And I'm also under the impression that as a whole, we're looking to review some of the committee guidelines to kind of realign ourselves. So one of the options is, to not have a co-chair until we get through that guidelines discussion. We can also appoint a co-chair, and then we could also have an interim co-chair. And I think, some of this stuff we'll probably discuss later on as it pertains to specifically the CARE guidelines and how we will move forward and kind of aligning ourselves with CARE and also with our definition of equity discussion, which we'll have right after this. But I guess it would be my recommendation to pause on appointing a chair right now, allowing us to kind of get through some of these, foundation, I would say foundation items for us as we realign ourselves. So specifically, our definition for equity and anti-racism, and then the prioritization of goals for this fiscal year, which I imagine would include looking at the CARE guidelines and just realigning with the purpose of our committee meeting, and at a greater, I guess, discussion how we impact the work of the commission. So, yeah, I will open it up for discussion if anyone has thoughts on that.
Commissioner Harden, I will just state that in the current guidelines, section 2.1 on appointments does read that the Arts Commission will chair, the Arts Commission chair will appoint a committee for anti-racism and equity members and name the co-chairs based on recommendations from the committee, from this committee. So whatever is decided would basically be what, if something changes, if you all make a decision to change the current standing of the community co-chair for CARE, then that would just need to be that information would need to be provided to the commission in next week's meeting, so that the commissioner, so that Chair Love could make that official.
Okay, and right now we do not have an identified co-chair, if I'm correct, officially.
That's my understanding. The last that would have been named was Member McCormick, and then it's up to this body whether you all proceed with that in the interim, or if for any reason you want to change it. Just if you change it in any way, just that would need to be that information would need to be provided then to Chair Love. That's.
Does everybody understand the reason we have a co-chair for CARE? Okay, just make sure.
When you, did you resign as co-chair, or were you, I know it was, yeah.
I had to take a break for work reasons. I returned, and this was a conversation with Daniel at the time. I could reassume that position, but then we didn't meet and we didn't have that conversation. I'm good with whatever the decision is, truly. But that's, to answer your question, that's what happened.
Are there any other thoughts, questions?
My instinct is to say wait. We're just all getting to know each other as well, so I think it's better to wait. But I'm also open if we choose the other way.
Yeah, go ahead, Camille.
Yeah, I think one of my questions was just, have we clarified like how responsibilities are shared between the chairs, or is that something like we would still need to define?
Right. I think that we're in this space where, while, you know, the guidelines do say we're supposed to operate in this way, I think we're in a space of clarifying some of the purpose of the guidelines, what exactly we're getting at in terms of actions as it relates to Metro Arts within the guidelines. So I think that's something that we're possibly trying to look at again and reevaluate exactly how we go about that. So leaning on what Lydia said, I do think we're in a transition space of getting to know each other. I'm just meeting you today for the first time. So, and we do have a lot of discussion ahead, I think, about realigning and kind of taking a look at CARE and its impact. So I'm in favor of that. I think I'm also well aware that as a commissioner, this body was not created with me in mind as a commissioner to lead. And I think it's really important that while I realize that we need somebody to kind of chair us at this moment, in the future, I absolutely have every intention of figuring out what that dynamic looks like, what those responsibilities are, and ultimately finding a way to put the community co-chair, at the forefront of leading this body. So, yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that does. And with that context, and again, what you said too, I'm fine with waiting as well until we kind of, clarify some details more.
Okay. Go ahead.
I think one thing I would say is just that we could, like, given the purpose of the co-chair, kind of, as you said, kind of foreground that in discussions, just so that we come back around to it sooner rather than later, so that in the interim, the burden doesn't fall to you, and that we can, in whatever way we decide, like, really live into the spirit of that co-chair idea. So that's what I would say.
Okay.
Just.
And I guess I'm asking, do we need to make we don't need to make an action item if nothing is changing, if we're not proposing anything to go to commission?
No.
Okay. Are there any other comments on this item?
I have a question.
Yes.
How long will we wait to make a decision?
I think, that is something that maybe we could discuss and decide today, and have that, I know we're hoping to have some discussions in the future. I wonder when, I don't know exactly when we'll be at that point where we have found some alignment and clarity. I would love to say next meeting we can be there, but I can't. I don't know how confident I am that we'll be ready for that.
I'm just asking because very often, if we don't have an end point in mind, we don't make a decision.
Yeah.
So just be mindful of that.
So I agree with that. I think maybe for me, what it feels like is we need more of a process for this committee. So we need to establish the purpose of this committee and the role of this committee with the commission. We need to open up applications and make sure we have a full committee as well. And I think people will apply if they feel like this committee is useful and purposeful and it's purpose-driven. And then I think from that, we can get a lead from that. But I think right now we're still at a stage of figuring things out. So I would hesitate to put that all on the shoulders of one person who may, it's a time of transition. So I don't want someone to be fully accountable for where this ends and all of us to kind of pitch in the beginning.
I hear that.
So that's to say I think it'll
Yeah.
take months, but I think we're going to hopefully get there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I agree. And I will say again, I know that my role is chair per the definition on the paper, but I see myself more as leading us through the agenda versus actually being the chair of the body itself at this moment as we're going through this transition. So, Dr. Coleman, I don't have an exact answer
Not
for
a
you.
problem. I just wanted to put it out there for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that we probably will have a couple other things that are stepping stones to that decision that we'll hopefully put some dates on today. But yeah, I think that's the honest answer.
Thank you.
So go ahead.
Just one more comment. In the meantime, it'll be incumbent upon the community members to hold accountable the chair and to make sure that the philosophy of the balance of power is upheld while we're waiting.
Thank you. Welcome, Ellen. Happy Friday. Ellen, I will briefly catch you up. We're talking about agenda item D and the first discussion item, confirming a co-chair appointment. In summary, and please correct me if I'm wrong, we've decided we need to wait a little bit on this decision. We think we have some more alignment and goals that we need to identify, and we feel like there's a couple more steps that we need to complete before we're comfortable making that decision. And I think Lydia also said we want to invite more people into this body, but we need to make sure it's clear what we're asking of this body before we do that. So Terry was just, asking you all to remain accountable to me as chair at this time as community members, given that our guidelines ask for a co-chair from the community. So that's a very brief summary of the past few minutes. But.
Correction.
Oh.
The accountability is the chair. We're holding the chair because that's the purpose of the chair, co-chair. Not you, but the person seated as chair. If we don't have that other person as a balance, then the committee holds the chair.
Right.
It's okay. It's all right. That's
Semantics.
You were thinking it, but I just wanted.
Yes.
wanted
Sorry,
to be clear.
I got my words crossed, but
Direction.
yes.
I'm also going to suggest to the committee that maybe once we see where we're at with section D2, how that discussion goes, and figuring out the equity and anti-racism definitions that could be proposed to be included in the guidelines, that when we look at setting the goals for FY25, that could probably be a good time to also look at the calendar, look at the upcoming commission meetings, and then base an idea of a timeline for when we'd like these goals to be met, including defining them in such a way where it's clear enough that we feel comfortable naming a co-chair or recommending a co-chair to the commission at that specific meeting. So if we look at the calendar with section D3 and base some of those goals based on when we know you'll be able to present these things to the commission, that may be a good place for us to figure out a timeline based on Dr. Coleman's recommendation.
Thank you. I guess we're all good on that item. Thank you, Josiah. Are there any other comments before we move on? Cool. Thank you all. Next, I think, is an exciting, daunting part of our day today as we get to talk about the equity and anti-racism definitions. I think after last meeting, I think we had a realization that there needs to be a base that we can all jump from or swim from or whatever action we're taking from it, that needs to be of consensus among us. And I think we asked staff to kind of help prepare some language that might help guide our discussion about determining what the definition of equity is for Metro Arts as an agency. And our hope is that we will take, our own definition and put it forward before the commission and ask them to align themselves and adopt that definition as well. So that is kind of our goal today, is to kind of open up that conversation and review some language, and then have a discussion and see if we can maybe find a shared definition. So with that, I will maybe hand it over to Chuck. Are you going to steer us through? Or?
I'm just going to type over here from the
okay.
group discussion, but Josiah, if you'd like to facilitate.
Chuck, could you bring up on the screen the language that that we emailed to you, just as potential examples? So this really is one of those places where we're going to defer to the committees as individuals and as a collective, your experiences, your work, and how you've used language in the past for your own organizations or collectives or in your own capacities to use a working definition of equity, and then how might that inform not only what definition CARE adopts, but where it adopts it in its current guidelines. Like, what is it, and then where does it best belong? Whether that's in the 1.2, the purpose, in its vision or practices, or in its scope. We want to make sure you all define what it is and where the best place for it to live in your guidelines is. So just as things, nothing more than to really just to get the discussion going, beyond what we've sent you via email, there's also a couple of examples. Again, the South Arts equity statement, again, is a statement that then includes somewhat of a definition in the latter sentences to more specifically define how it tries to be equitable. We chose South Arts because it's an arts organization that works and has involvement throughout the southeastern ecosystem, and then beneath that is actually an organization called Propel Atlanta. They specifically lay out how they define equity. They also lay out how they define racial equity to an extent, and then also beneath that is basically a kind of a context where they go more into detail into looking at how that informs their work with urban design. That part may not be as specifically relevant to what CARE is using the definition for here, but we thought it would be a helpful context. And yeah, that.
Can I ask a question to start? So we have a cultural equity statement, for Metro Arts. And where does where is our concern that this is not, that this is, I guess I'm thinking about like what, in terms of the history of how this has happened, what already exists? Is it that we feel like it's not clear, or it's not as explicit as we want it to be, or that there's disagreement philosophically about the fundamentals of that, because we have something, but we clearly need clarification. Or what were you like? I guess, yeah.
And I also encourage other staff members to speak to this to the extent you're comfortable. But my understanding, and what I believe our shared understanding is from feedback from dialogue with committee members and community members and among staff, is that the equity statement, as values driven as it is, doesn't give precision or a concise definition of what equity is, so that it can then become a lens to look at the actions or the proposed actions or decisions of the commission. So in terms of like just a go-to definition of does it check off on these things? And of course, it'll be a more complex work than just measuring it against the definition, but it's more of a statement of values rather than actually defining what it looks like and what we hope it'll look like.
Chuck, can you possibly bring our current equity statement up? Okay.
I get, Heather, kind of responding to what you said. I think part of it is also looping that into our guiding document too, so it's clearly stated. I don't know. I think that would just be
Which guiding document?
like our guidelines, the CARE guidelines, and making sure that it's kind of clear there.
The CARE guidelines from June 2020, that document. Yeah, cool.
Yes, that is, wow. It's 4 years ago.
I also want to invite committee members, as you're looking at this or reviewing it, if you are identifying, if you're looking at this equity statement and you're saying, hey, no, that actually feels clear, that seems actionable, what does it look like to just ensure that's included, that we just use that in the current guidelines, or make that actionable in the guidelines, to please bring that up for discussion.
This current equity statement, to the guiding document is 2020.
So, like you were saying, Josiah, the equity statement is not in the CARE guidelines. So what we're doing today is to define it, to put it in the guidelines. Okay. So, okay, go ahead.
Also think just to support, like, yes, we want to put it in the guidelines. Also, if it ends up being something different than this, or like if we realize that something is really not being captured in what is already there, in addition to it being internally in our guidelines, also using that agency-wide with staff and bringing that definition to the commission as well.
And to follow up on that, thank you, Claudia, is, a part of this process, which won't all get done today, is determining how things like that happen, how we operate within the commission. So I think this is the easy example to make it make sense. Okay, we decide there's an equity statement. We review our own equity statement. We define what equity is in terms of this body. And then once we have that, not only do we loop that into our own guidelines, but we make an official recommendation. Hey, this is where we are in terms of equity. This is what it means to us as a body, as the Committee for Anti-Racism and Equity for the commission. We recommend that we update Metro Arts equity statement in this way. So that's just kind of, I guess, an example of how I would envision, and I'm kind of soundboarding with everyone here, how I envision that process working in terms of, moving through committee to commission as action items.
I can start dumping, and people can board off that. Something that I feel like is missing from a lot of these equity statements is language in class. Those are two big categories in Nashville, since we have a very large immigrant community, and the number one, well, not the number one, but top 5 things that I hear from my community is that the Metro Arts application isn't accessible because you have to be a grant writer, and you have to speak English. So I want that also recognized, that you're missing thousands of people in the city because of the language and accessibility of the application. And that could be easily remedied by a streamlined application and grant clinics. But I think language should be in there, especially since we've had a lot of English-only bills in the city. So that needs to be somewhere in the equity statement. Class also needs to be in there. Yeah, especially in the arts, because what's seen as high art and low art is a big conversation at commission meetings. So I think a conversation about class and culture and working class people and accessibility for working class people to also create art through Metro Arts funding and support is important. The other thing is region in Nashville. I would like to see that equity sees that if we're going to say, I have disagreements with saying everyone, like in some of these equity statements. I think the vision for equity is that everyone's needs are met, but I don't think the practice includes everyone when we are practicing equity. So I want to make that distinction that equity is inherently exclusive because it has to recognize that there was harm and that there were people who benefited and people who were harmed. So I have an issue with saying everyone, and I get that that's the vision, that everyone's needs are met, but I think in practice we need to understand not everyone's going to be happy with the decisions made, and you got to be the bad guy in the room to make equity happen. I have a bunch of words as well that are not included in the sheets provided to us that I think are also important. Access is a really important term for equity that needs to get discussed, and I think that goes to what Josiah was saying, is what are the practical measures that we can hold Metro Arts accountable, and I think access is important. Accountability's in here, to be fair. Justice is also important, to see the systemic issues, the larger system that Metro Arts is in. Harm and abuse also are not in here. And yeah, and I also think it would be useful for us in another meeting to look at what are some common things that are racist, that are said to justify racism, that don't sound that bad. So, for instance, I've heard commissioners say that what happened in August was fiscally responsible decision to make. That to me is a really problematic statement that needs to be negotiated and needs to be broken down. It's not fiscally responsible to defund people of color from their taxes. So that may be for another session, but there are a lot of things, I think, when we look at these statements, they're very easy to say, yeah, racism is bad. We're all against racism. But in practicality, we're going to see something different. So if we can have a list of common retorts, racist retorts that we hear, that we can discuss, I would appreciate that. And the last thing I will say is that it would be great to have in the equity statement something about individuals being paid through Metro Arts. That is something that I think is equitable, because individuals should not have to rely on an organization to fund them and should not have to depend on a second party to get that funding. So Even my organization, right? I don't want people to depend on us to get that funding. There shouldn't be, that to me is a barrier. If people are waiting on Mahabba to apply for funding for them, that to me is a barrier in and of itself. So I do want to state that probably should be in there as well. That's a period at the end.
Go ahead. I just think on that last thing, I think it's good that you mentioned that, because I think while that is something that we might want to adopt, that's specific to a Metro Arts, a specific process or granting process. And I'm wondering, we have to kind of creatively determine what is the language that we have that applies overall to all of the programming and all of the projects that Metro Arts takes on. So how do we catch that? In that situation, hypothetically, how do we have language that is not super fine to like being paid, but we'll catch that anyways, if that makes sense. I don't have the answer. I can think about it. But it's a good thing that you bring that up, because it's with this that we don't want to go into like specifics and write this code that's like they must do XYZ specifically with this in mind. But how do we craft something that would flag some of that behavior or actions, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think my answer to that would be, I think the importance of this body is that it's not hampered by the legality that the commission is quote unquote hampered by, right? Or they choose to be hampered by. So I think that this space should be used as an imaginative, innovative space to say, this is what equity is. If you don't want to be in alignment with it because you want to say Metro Legal and the Tennessee Code, that's fine. But this is what equity is. And I don't want my issue is if we're going to dodge defining it because of legal purposes, or I just don't want to be defined by the law in this space.
No, I hear that.
Which
I think in this space that definitely put it up there, like put it in the notes, because it will help us hone it in later, I think, if that makes sense. I definitely think we should discuss that here. I love that you brought it up. I think I just wanted to point it out as like, that's the type of specific situation that we want to say, okay, now these are the things that we've considered. These are the situations that we've, watched or seen and experienced. And we need to make sure that whatever we put forward in front of commission is covering these bases, I guess. So I would agree with you on that for sure. Sorry.
No, I was having the same thought, and I think this is a conversation that can be picked up again when we talk about our goals for FY25, because I think something that is more specific that would satisfy that and we could include that language is looking at the grants guidelines for FY25, and that's something that the grants team has expressed that they want CARE to have input in. So I think that is a space where we can specifically use that language, while having this space, like you said, be a broader catch for why we want those other things to happen in those specific spaces. So I just wanted to note that that is also something to look forward to, and to be thinking about, and a way that hopefully we can operationalize the definition that we come up with today, and start to create processes where we do implement statements of equity, outcomes that are equitable into the specific programs and processes that Metro Arts has as an agency.
I have kind of an offsides question. Does the city council have an equity statement? I mean, they're going to be part of the adjudication
It's my
process.
understanding that we're the only community that has an equity statement. I have not checked every department, but that is, I'm sorry, frequently stated.
I do know that Metro Schools has some significant documentation on equity and what it means for
They have
them.
some of it here.
Yeah, and we did some research and discovered that after our last meeting, and it was led by Ashford Hughes, and they put together a quite significant report and documentation about their goals for equity within the school system, and I think that's been helpful to look at. But that is a very good question. Yeah.
Does Andrea Blackman not have one? Dr. Blackman? I assume she would, that it would apply to the council. But that might be an assumption.
I have two thoughts I'm wondering about. Number one, I'm interested some of this conversation about just made me think of the difference between this committee when it was outside, when it wasn't a committee. So when it wasn't an official committee, right, of the commission, and the constraints of that and the opportunities of that compared with now, and the constraints and the opportunities, right, in terms of thinking about what can be advocated for, what can be how things are. Even we were talking about having meetings, right, where you could get a lot of feedback because it didn't have to be a public meeting. You could do it any place, all of the kind of constraints. I think about that sometimes in terms of like operationalizing it, right? And kind of the inside outside piece. I don't have a thought about that. It just occurs to me. The second thing I think about sometimes when I read equity statements is there's an article I assign my students about doing research on communities. It's like damage-centered research, right? So this idea that looking at things as broken, and she proposes, I mean, this is a complete oversimplification, but she proposes centering like desire. And to me, I've always thought of that kind of centering the desire of the community, the artist, as being equitable. And yeah, a lot of that's related to kind of some of the things you said, Lydia, in terms of what different people want, but like thinking about desire-centered, as opposed to like, and this is concerned with research, so this is a different thing, but like just kind of documenting brokenness, right? And so I'm wondering if there's that kind of place for it, like some kind of nod to that in any kind of short statement that acknowledges desire of communities in terms of what we hope the impact of the work of the commission and the agency would be. So that's neither here nor there, but centering desire, I guess, as an equitable practice.
Thank you, Heather. I am looking at Metro's website, and there's a very brief definition of equity. I think it's very overarching. I can read it if that would be helpful. So equity is, defined on Metro's website as both a process and a product It refers to fair practices and policies that ensure everyone has access to the same opportunities. Equity and equality have different meanings. Equality means treating everyone as if their experiences are exactly the same. Equity means acknowledging and addressing past and present structural inequalities that advantage some and disadvantage others. And that's kind of the definition that is on Metro's website, and it is also built upon some of the stuff that Ashford has done, as it states on the website. So just based on that, it sounds like there is a bit of a base for Metro that maybe we can work off of, I think. Sorry.
That's here.
Oh, yes. Oh, we had
So to
printed
answer
that.
your question, this came out of Andrea's office, yes. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. I didn't need to go.
So to me, an equity statement needs to include everything, but it needs to be simple enough that anyone can look at it and read it, like someone for whom English is a second language, or someone not written in university speak, so that someone without, a vast vocabulary can look at it so they'll know if they're being treated inequitably, right? I mean, sometimes they're so full of words that they can be viewed any way you want, but making something simple, succinct, that touches on the things that we value and that we think are important for equity in the arts, so that anyone can look at it and understand it.
What is a way in which, what would be a, in terms of thinking about generation or like ideation or generating language, is that a process that you saw us doing here, or is that like a bigger discussion, or what were
Yeah.
you hoping we would?
I think the way I envision it is, and I envision this as a kind of a workshop where we actually, it might be helpful if we actually put the equity statement on the screen, and if we actually go through and kind of look at it and propose changes, kind of like a Word document editing process in real time, track changes, but we're working on it in real time. I think my previous experience, we did that with one of the public art guidelines, and we literally had a CARE meeting. We put the public art guidelines on the screen, and we went through it, and we tried to use our definition of equity and our lens of equity and anti-racism to try to change some things and tweak things where we thought, okay, that seems like it's a bit unfair, or, these are things where we feel like we're falling short. So I don't know if that's something that we could do simply with our own equity statement as Metro Arts, and then, see what comes of that, and then kind of, because, we all have our own ideas and thoughts, and the notes will get long, but I don't know if that would be helpful for all of us, or.
I think that's just as staff input. I think that's helpful. We currently, I think, we've been doing that to an extent, so I think we can do it intentionally. We're making notes of the input, the things that Lydia's identified, that Heather's mentioned, that Ellen has spoken to about just the very language of the definition or language itself, about its accessibility. So I think if we continue in that vein, that if that makes sense to if that works for the committee, I think that's good.
And I was going to say, I don't know if I'm alone in this, but when we went from equity definition in the agenda to saying equity statement, that's a whole other task. Or like a creative writing prompt. It's like, hey, let's do a short story together, or let's just go with what we've already proven with here. And then maybe, again, I'm just throwing this on the table as an observer and suggestion. a quote unquote, like Lydia said, dump. Like if everybody could just dump their thoughts up here, and we have this, I say this, it's right there on the bottom, with what Andre already has and everything, and say this is what the CARE has amended to this from the notes. So it takes the pressure and the timetable and everything in the focus and puts it all together of like, it's something that we can at least not, it may not get done within the next hour and 10 minutes, but I think that the brilliant minds and the experiences and everything that's already been talked about, if we look at it as that simple exercise, then it makes it surmountable at least.
Chuck, I was thinking the same thing of like making sure we're distinguishing between an equity statement and like trying to define what we mean when we say equity, because I think there is, I think we have run into the problem that Ellen had mentioned. Like there's a lot of flowery language, a lot of values-based language, a lot of maybe like scholarly language, but what is a definition that one is accessible and two is something that we can operationalize and measure our processes against. So I just wanted to echo what Chuck had said and kind of make sure that we're on track with that.
And one more thing I'll throw out, just going back to like, elementary school of like, I've always remembered of like, don't define something, use that word in the definition. So I see it like 5 times in here. So just going back to the flowery language of like, let's be specific and poignant. Because again, I'll just go and say it, brilliant minds around this table.
Like, for example, some of the things it says, the ability to express, celebrate, champion. There's so much art going on in our community that you guys don't know anything about because it's not within the arts ecosystem. It's happening within every community in the city. And there's nothing in our equity statement that shows value for those things that different communities create within their own community, right? But it's art, and they could do more if there was funding, right? But I just think we need to expand, because you could read this and say, oh, well, what do we define as art? Because that's always been our problem, is the stuff we do is not really defined as art, right? I'm the organization that I work with. So, I think we need to make it so that it is inclusive of everybody and every tradition that we have in the community.
Yeah, and when you say it, you're referring to the statement, correct? Yeah, and I guess as we get further into the conversation, it seems like that's really the priority, maybe, and I'm asking that as a question. Is the priority now, just thinking about it, that yes, we have the similar definition of equity that we agree on, but we specifically seem to map that out of what it means to Metro Arts in our statement. So is that something we should look at together, separately? Should we not do that? I'm just literally just throwing that out.
I think it might be helpful to like literally read through this definition line by line and say like, please bring your input, what you think works, what you think doesn't, what you feel okay with, what you don't feel okay with, in the definition that the DEI office currently has on the Metro website. I think that's probably a helpful, like, basic place to start, and then we can hold that definition edited up to our equity statement on the website and see if they can coexist.
That sounds good to me. So look, do you all want to just get back into it? Cool. Thank you, Claudia.
I'll just do a little dump. So I was thinking in terms of the definition, I had looked up something before. One I really liked from a DIE practitioner named Lily Zhang. They're well known. I thought theirs was very outcome centered, which might be helpful here. It was eliminating structure barriers resulting from historical and present inequities and meeting individuals and groups' unique needs. And so I kind of like that definition, just because it's, you know, those are two things you can try to measure then. Another one, and I.
You say it again.
Oh, say it again.
Yeah,
I'm sorry,
it's a
Chuck.
little
I
slow.
forgot
I'm not
you're
a
writing
courtroom
notes.
stenographer yet. So eliminating structures
bad.
related to, and just to get it for everybody to view as well.
Yeah.
And fill in. So go a little slower. I can type fast. But
Eliminating structural barriers
structural.
Resulting from historical and present inequities, and meeting individuals and groups' unique needs.
Equities and meeting. Sorry.
Individuals and groups' unique needs.
Thank you.
And then Heather, you were also talking about like desire focused and kind of like, I think maybe more of the positive, like acid framing. And so another way of wording it, the same practitioner. I'm sorry to make you write word for word.
I'm here just for
And this one is a little more wordy, so it may not be right. But the measured experience of individual, interpersonal, and organizational success and well-being across stakeholder populations, and the absence of discrimination, mistreatment, or abuse for all. So those are two that I could say it again.
Okay.
Or I could just send it to you.
Yeah, send it to me. Yeah.
Okay. But yeah, I like those because they're very outcome focused and you can measure things with that. I do think some of the other broader examples could come in the statement, but a definition can at least help us find something to measure. And maybe some of the things, Lydia, too, you brought up could, you know, those could be captured in broad statements like, you know, we probably have an accessibility statement, something, you know, a non-discrimination statement, things like that. So that's what I want to say. I do like the one here listed too, though, from Metro. I think it's just, it could have more specificity, you know, so that I'll say that.
I like that because particularly the first one, I think that's what I was thinking about with the desire, like kind of the flourishing, the desire, the agency, right? Restoring, that there's a restorative piece to that. And then the first part of that, though, is about how you do that kind of in terms of the dismantling or addressing those kinds of things. It just makes me think whenever we start talking about words like this, we use them all the time, and then I'm always thinking like, well, why, like a toddler, like why? And I think like a piece of this is about, particularly as it relates to art, very broadly defined, right, is about that kind of flourishing and the transformational possibilities, right? And so that is what makes equity so important and can feed into our definition. I guess my point is the way we define it as a committee can be specific, right, to that which art can do that we would want everyone to have.
Well, if anything, I'm just saying it while they're thinking of the next notes, but like what Trey said earlier about just us doing the foundation. So when we're in these commission meetings, or at least observing the commission meetings, that when they say anti-racism or they say equity, it's clarifying what it means in this room. It can be different somewhere else, but like to help communication versus twisting narratives, twisting stories when the intentions are good from most.
I also want to invite the committee to think and speak further if things come to you, as I think some really great things have been stated in thinking specifically about what Metro Arts does. Like what exactly before without the benefit of the knowledge we have of what equity is and what it's supposed to do, thinking of Camille's points about outcomes and Lydia's point specifically about what a specific outcome would look like ideally in individuals being supported for their work. Like, what are things that Metro Arts currently does, and how can that inform how you define equity or how you define an equitable outcome? Because that way we get to link it to our operations and really think of language that's going to be clear and most helpful to us to keep our operations accountable to equitable standards.
I mean, even just having a simple statement in the equity statement that Metro Arts values equally artists, arts organizations, and community members. I mean, just so that everything you do, you can look at it and say, oh, we equitably value all aspects, all people.
Sorry, Josiah, can you maybe not repeat all of it, but repeat the question again? Sure. Sorry.
So how do we tie or how do we tether equitable, how do we tether definitions of equity to the actual things Metro Arts does? Metro Arts funds arts organizations. It provides operational grants. It provides grants for projects. It creates, it supports public art. Like, what are the specific outcomes? What's not equitable right now about how these things play out? And how can that inform how we want to define equity and how we ideally would want to do these things? Is that clear? Yeah.
I have a thought related to that, Josiah, which is about, of course, the awarding of funds, right? And also access to tools, networks, these things that can be really beneficial. Creation of community, expanding creative community, encouraging that. Access, connection, growth of network. So I guess I was trying to think, because obviously money is the obvious thing, but it's not the only thing. And so what else, I guess, could be a part of that? I'm interested in that.
Yeah, I was going to say, looking at the cultural equity statement, it seems like a lot of examples are already built in there. So, you know, there's a paragraph section saying specifically Metro Arts will, and there's bullet points, and it talks about reviewing, editing grants, practices to ensure, you know, underrepresented communities can compete equitably. And so I know those some of the examples we're mentioning here. So maybe it's just refreshing some of those to make sure everything's covered there. I think about, Ellen, what you just said about all arts forms being valued, and maybe under the believe section. So it says Metro Arts believes, we put something about, you know, all forms of the arts are, have inherent value or something like that. Like different statements, we can add more if we feel it's lacking.
One thing that came to mind for me is like engagement, and like I think a lot of times when we look at grants and you know public art projects and you know statistics of like who was awarded what. But I feel like it might be a good idea to take a look at who's actually engaging with the opportunities. Or, you know, we thinking about Lydia talking about access and just like, do people even feel like it's approachable? And, you know, is there a way we measure how, like, you know, say it's awesome. We might say, okay, we awarded this project to a black artist, but, you know, it could have been 9 white artists and 1 black artist who applied, and we're celebrating it like, yay, okay, we picked a black artist, but why didn't more black artists apply when we had, you know, things like that. And I don't know exactly what that looks like in the definition, but I feel like if there's a way for us to gauge how many people feel comfortable, how wide of a range of our community we can actually get to engage with our programs and opportunities, would be interesting.
I'm wondering if it would be helpful to maybe look at those definitions that we have up there. I think the ones Camille provided are a really good start because they are outcomes based. I'm wondering how it would feel if we adjusted or added specific language about the arts community and about specifically artists. I think that might help us get to where we want to go in terms of like having a definition that we could take with us.
In that same regard, in Lydia's mention in notes to include access, but in this writing exercise, knowing that every thought that y'all come on, if we're working from this one that is Andrea's right there at the top, then we can add these things instead of talking, because we went back to the equity statement, I think, with how we're focusing back to this definition. But let's just stick to this definition for a minute, and within those talks of what do we need to add, and then whittle back down, you know, without the pressure of saying, you know, when you say this and I add this right here, we've changed it and it's changed on the Metro's website. Like, let's do this exercise together, I think.
Which is the one where
The top one, yeah, and then the definitions that I'm highlighting right now are the ones that Camille mentioned. But this top one that I put at the top for a reason, all these are notes with what Lydia said and several other people are saying what they need to include. If we want to add those, you know, look at these. I'm trying to say it with one screen here, but as far as a writing exercise with all, what we're looking at, this is what we have to work with right now. Not going, yeah. So, and then the first two were what Camille said. So you can look at all of this, tell me to scroll down or up or whatever, and then these are the notes that I wrote from what Lydia said. But if we want to add more notes before we do that, or whatever we want to go with facilitating that definition and adding to it and looking at it, reading it, and kind of talking or deleting some of it. But
So one thing I see in that definition is the word everyone. So it refers to fair practices and policies, whatever that might be a place where a nod to, like, let's be specific about that. So individuals, organizations, how did you say it, Ellen? You know, kind of being explicit about what everyone means, actually. That seems like a nod to one of the things we've been talking about.
and really throwing it out here in this kind of exercise of like, again, it's not permanent once you say it, but is there a better way to say it? So like the other day, Dr. Como we were talking about something, and access is like, well, they don't know what they don't know until they know. So it's a community engagement or an outreach issue with what staff needs to do, but how do we explain that other than right here, they have defined it with just all encompassed around the word access. So you almost have to redefine access, or like you were just saying, do we need to change that and that for everyone?
I'm wondering if we can just take out the sentence about equality.
Yeah.
And then maybe talk through like the sentence that says equity means acknowledging and addressing past and present structural inequities that advantage some and disadvantage others. Are there things that we want to add or subtract? I do think adding more specific language about like what communities we're talking about and what we're here to do will be helpful. Yeah.
And tell me if there's a better way. Like I said, I'm going to leave the one up top as the original definition, and then this is editing if we want to edit this, and then notes below and everything that you all tell me to do to edit within that.
Feels like the second part of that too, like I think the first part can be workshop to talk about what we've been talking about, acknowledging, addressing past and present, that it could be so that, right, instead of like advantage some and disadvantage others. I mean, that could be part of the first, but so that kind of what you're was talking about, Camille, that second part, so that what individuals, organizations, blah, 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 can
Can you substitute everyone for all artists, arts organizations, and communities have access to the same opportunities?
Creative communities or just communities?
I would say communities, yeah, to me.
I think listening to what Camille was saying about I think specifically the outcome centered and desire focused, it feels like maybe there's a reworking of the word process and product that I don't necessarily feel like aligns with the arts, and I don't know if you all feel like that, but maybe we could find a way to just make that expand that a little bit, and maybe remove product as it just feels like that's not, though art is a product at times, that's not really the goal of what we're here for. So just putting that out there. I really do like outcome centered and desire focused. Those like terms I think resonate with me.
I thought product was a weird word too. What do they mean by that? Do they mean the outcome or the value? I just don't know what they mean by product. That seems like an odd word they would have used, whoever wrote that.
I know and I don't want to be like, I feel like it's not safe to just address past and present inequities. I feel like we might need to add something about pending inequities or like threats to, I don't know if that makes sense. Weird times, but I don't know. I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there. I just see maybe realizing that there's still going to be threats that come to equity based on equity work. Just being able to anticipate that and realizing that within the definition.
I think we can do better than advantages some and disadvantages others. I think being more clear about what groups of people have been disadvantaged aligns with the language that's on the equity statement. And I think we need to be as clear as possible with this.
I agree, Claudia. I think better terms would be harmed and excluded historically, because I think that also says like our community would be disadvantaged, and I don't see us as disadvantaged. I see us as just excluded. I would go so far as to say exploited because it's our tax money that's not coming to us, but that might be a little too far. But excluded and harmed, I think, are better terms than disadvantaged. And I don't like the term advantaged because it erases those who are benefiting historically. So I would rather the term benefiting and to name benefiting the upper class and white communities, downtown communities in Nashville. I'll keep dumping, actually. I don't like the term needs. I would rather, in the second definition, the outcome-centered one, I would rather the word goals there. I just don't like seeing marginalized communities as in need of government funding. That is our money, so that's our goal, and that should be prioritized to us. Don't like the term organizations because that, I think, has a prickly history within Metro as well. What it means to be an arts organization is also prickly. And I think that there are some multi-million organizations that can come in and say, well, you're supporting organizations, you need to support us because we support Black community members, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't want the equity statement also to be a loophole for people who have benefited to come through and use it against us. And I would add also inequities in Metro as well to the present and current or historical and present inequities within Metro in Nashville in the U.S. And I had something to say about Josiah's comments about outcomes, but I'll wait.
I do like that I think one of the definitions that Camille offered specifically states eliminating those structural barriers. I think we could be clearer in this top definition about not just acknowledging and addressing those things. What do we mean when we're saying we're addressing them?
That you are reacting to them and that you are also trying to respond in a way that gives direction or offers possibilities, or it doesn't necessarily mean a solution.
I don't have a cohesive thought, but I've got words. Responsive is one. When it comes to communities and having access, equity is also where those communities can fend for themselves. That may not be the way to put it, but so that they're not restricted by an expectation that they can't do it for themselves. Does that make sense?
Like agency?
Thank you. Yes.
I'm the one that's just going to keep going back to that definition, not to say we're doing anything wrong, but just like, I'm going to write all these notes down here, but I don't, so there, nothing is for naught. That may go into talks about the culture, the equity statement later, but as far as focusing each time on this, even if we're going to Camille's examples, look at this and tell me what we need to add. And then, like I said, this is a working one. That's the top one that is set in stone right now. So whatever is helpful, and I'm just going to keep on editing while you're discussing it.
I don't mean to be nitpicky, but do we need to inequities within the definition? Is that I'm wondering if there are other things that we've called out, like harm, exclusion, barriers. Do we redefine inequity within it as well, or is that going too deep?
I'm a firm believer that we're going to come up with the answers for that definition keep on throwing those thoughts out. So no, the answer to my opinion is no, but go ahead, Heather.
Yeah, I think any definition we're coming up with is in this particular moment in time, like particular historical moment, whatever. And so it can be responsive, like in that way, in terms of specificity, I guess. I would agree with that.
How do we feel about the top sentence? Refers to fair practices and policies that ensure all artists, arts organizations, and communities have access to the same opportunities. I'm wondering if there's a way we can say that are we saying the same thing twice?
I like the two sentences. I would take out arts organizations and say ensure all Nashville artists and communities have access to funding and opportunities. I don't want to say the same opportunities because someone... And I think the second definition is more the action-oriented. So I like it.
And I don't think you can take arts organizations out since when you read the definition of Metro Arts, it's to fund nonprofit arts and civic organizations.
I'll push back and say that in and of itself is an inequity for people of color who don't have nonprofits and who are not supported by other nonprofits. So I'm not saying that organizations can't get funded. That's not the point. But that organizations who want funding from Metro Arts have to center the artist and the community. So I think that's why I would advocate for it being out. Obviously, it's not like a policy shift.
But I advocate for it being in because many arts organizations are the community for all of the artists. Sometimes for hundreds of them that are a part of that community.
I did want to maybe be careful about explicitly using the word funding in this definition, and in maybe grants guidelines that we work on in the future, we define one of those opportunities as funding.
Do we say something like resources? Because I think it's not limited to monetary funds. It could be mentorship. It could be, different things that Man, I'm really thinking about my words today.
No, I mean, that's the point of it, too.
Yeah.
And that's what, like, within that thing of what Lydia and Ellen were just saying, like, for me, it was just like, well, we start with, if it had said, which we've talked about at this discussion before, of saying the entire Nashville ecosystem. Well, you want to clarify what embodies the ecosystem, if we can, and be specific as much as possible in the definition. So it would include artists, art organizations. That's why I was like, well, communities, creative communities, it's like, let's be specific, where there's an understanding within the language when people are reading this, to capture it all.
I think resources comes closer. I'm totally in agreement with you, like about, that's kind of what I was saying before in terms of acknowledging the totality of not just what happens already, but what could happen. And so resources, I kind of think is it, but I'm not exactly sure. Something's not hitting me.
Sorry, why did we not like funding?
I like funding. I just don't think it's the only thing that it is. Like if it were named among things in a list, but I don't think it's the totality of what we could or should do.
Yeah, I think there are others. I don't know. I think one of the big challenges our city faces is like studio spaces and different things that artists need that they don't have access to, which is, of course, funding included. But just maybe how do we apply all of that without, because then we start listing funding, studio space, then we might forget something, and then we don't. How do we capture all of that? But then, like what Claudia says, when we do have that grants conversation, then it's like, make no mistake, we're talking about funding now, and we can almost take that and plug it into the like funding, but same access to funding in that case, or.
And going back to the result of this definition is to help the conversation that's in that room be specific. So instead of somebody saying funding here, and then they're like, well, we're talking about funding, and it's like, no. And then, like you said, Lydia, like in that one thing, when you're in that grants helping, or CARES in that grants helping that thing, the discussion, it's like, now I'm saying funding, and we have that concrete evidence in our foundation saying from that resources mentioned.
I just want to, I think there's a tendency when we discuss marginalized communities that we want to give them resources instead of the direct funding and just say, trust them and not police them and say, this is your money, take it. So that's why the funding word is important to me, that we're not straying into territory of, and I get resources are very important too, but a direct line to the money and that we've been barred from.
It's also possible for y'all to consider language where you name something broad like resources and then in parentheses, including but not limited to funding, visibility, space, etc. And then. Yeah,
I agree. Why not include both of it? And I hear you, Lydia. I think we try to use this catch-all, but when we do think about the basic, establishment of Metro Arts and the commission and what we're here to do, funding is a huge part of that. So yeah, I hear that.
How are you going to have guarantee access to space when Metro Arts doesn't have space of its own? I'm just curious.
You don't have to say space, yeah, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious. Maybe I'm thinking of a rewording, so maybe moving some words. So changing it so refers to practices and policies that ensure all Nashville artists, arts organizations, and communities have fair access or just access to resources. Because, I was having this challenge to reading it. It's like somebody may read that and think, well, everybody's going to get funding. And that's not, something we can guarantee. But, like, at least it's fair access, just access, something like that. And maybe I would suggest taking out fair in front of practices and policies again, because to some extent, somebody could read that, something into that subjectively.
I like the use of the word just.
I hear what Ellen is saying about that word space. Yeah, technically there is no space to offer, and I think I don't know.
One of the conversations our team had all the time was another part of equity is getting all these large organizations with all this expensive space to understand that part of equity is sharing it to those that are less resourced. So unless we're going to encourage that, we can't really guarantee anyone has space.
And I think it's not just resources too. I'm trying to think of, I know we do there's performances and participation experiences, participation in a creative life. So maybe something that too, resources and creative experiences, something to that extent. And I would use a different word, but I'm just brainstorming.
I know we hear that word programming a lot, but I'm about to get on thesaurus.com.
Is there a way to include in there something that indicates that there's a broad range of what's defined as art? Because I think one of Nashville's problems with inequity has always been that this art is considered real art, this art's not. But for many cultures that I work with, it's and in part of it's your life. It's not.
That was a big discussion we had when we did review the public art guidelines, because one of the ways that we would evaluate artists was artistic excellence was this phrase that was a buzzword. I think that was a really interesting conversation because it's become such a across the world in public art, it's become such a normal. It's a normal term. It's kind of status quo. So we had to really figure out a way to get away from that. But instead, what is the metric? What is the measurement? But yeah, I do think calling that out is a really important thing.
I feel like that's such a big conversation that, I feel like that's so big. I'd almost like to just leave it, but keep talking about that, or use a word to indicate expansive or whatever in terms of the way it's defined. But I think that's actually a super interesting thing for us in the future to dive into and to clarify and
all of our arts
discuss.
are dumped into folk and traditional arts, but yet Bharatanatyam is a 1,000-year-old classical dance form, right? But it's dumped into folk and traditional arts, even though it's culture of origin, it's one of the highest, right? So it's something that needs to be looked at. And
I'm wondering if looking at the equity statement on the website, we could put something about, there's a section that says Metro Arts believes, and I'm wondering if that would be a good place for a statement about recognizing all forms of art to live, and that's where we define what we mean when we say all. Not to, we have so much to do and so much to align ourselves with, rework, revisit. I do think making space for us to look at this after we have the definition that we land on is something to add to the to-do list.
I am noticing the time, I think that we could probably go on for a couple more hours about this. But I don't want to also cut it off just because we have a time.
Commissioner Harden, what might it look like for us as staff to take the work that the committee has done? I know ideally and very optimistically we were imagining having a finalized definition leaving today. Even before this meeting, like last week, as we were talking amongst ourselves, we realized that this may be part one of 2 meetings. But what the staff can take on in the interim, if we figure out when the next CARE meeting would be, we as staff can work to create a draft to provide to CARE members well in advance of that meeting for you to review, red line as you like, add notes to, and then come back to that red line in a place where we because it's really difficult to write things in real time, like a group. But if we provide you all something to respond to, and then come back with that, and then finalize that may put us in a really good place. And in the meantime, we can still set goals for when we want that definition finalized. What are our goals with the remaining guidelines, and then other things on the agenda for the commission that the committee wants to have input in, and go forward with that.
Adding to that, I know it has been like an overall goal for us to have some tangible things to give to commission at the next meeting. Would it be possible for us to present a draft, or have staff maybe finalizing or edit this, and then maybe over email or something, have some sort of like approval, voting, conversation about it?
Are you concerned that we have an action item to present, or is it just a tangible, like a substantial update? Because I do think that we're having good conversation here. It's not, but I also hear what you're saying. They're kind of like, what are y'all doing? Where's the...
Well, I also want to say, and maybe Dr. Coleman, you can speak more about this, but my fear is too that because there is a lot in this upcoming meeting in terms of there's MHRC, there's several like big things on the agenda. Our update is one of the committee updates, and I worry that there might not be time to talk about. But I'm also thinking, can we electronically share things, and even share things with commissioners and say, like this is a draft, and I have no clue, but so I just want to say that in terms of next week's meeting, that's my fear.
Well, considering that we also have to define anti-racism next. No. I'm saying, I'm throwing this out there in the and of like, that would be great to maybe even give us short, I'm not telling Chair what to say, but saying like maybe to bring that up of what we're talking about, what we didn't get to, we're excited, we're going to have more opportunities of this, but also legally, we need to know this. How can we more efficiently talk together the process, like we talked about earlier, within community members to not get this done, but to do it right efficiently. And we want to get on this, but we can't have a meeting every other day for 3 hours,
Definitely. On that note, what's the process that we need to go by, I guess, to have legal representation here in this meeting? Is that...
I think it's just like the IT, we just need to ask, and if somebody can send a representative, and just like the DEI, and it just being respectful of their schedules and as much as all of ours.
Yeah, I think that would be really good, especially as we start to prioritize our goals and we start to think about what we're going to accomplish next meeting, I think it might push us in a direction if we have legal here to really pose some of those questions, like.
And I know Josiah has mentioned that several times, of just having a representative from both that and Andrea's office will help facilitate and get more done with the timely manner.
Yeah. And then also to Claudia's point, I'm wondering if I like what Josiah, sorry, I'm going all the way back. I'm glad that you said that, Josiah. I think it's hard to be like, just let staff do it, but I think, we're confident in you all as a team.
Y'all are doing the work. We're just basically getting it on paper.
But you're doing the work all the time, so, yeah, I definitely love that idea. I think that that's a healthy way to operate. And then, I think, and you guys, please, you all, please, correct me. But yeah, I think that's a good idea to take these notes and then see what you all can craft and then, send it back to us. And next meeting, maybe we can have an official vote on that. And then, yeah, how do we feel about that? Sorry.
Question. Having legal here in the context of this conversation means what?
I think I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself with that. I think prepping for talking about number 3, which are our goals, and thinking about the process of establishing what our guidelines are, and some of the things like what Chuck brought up about, communication and getting business done in between meetings. Not necessarily as it relates specifically to our definition.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, sorry.
And them not having a say. I remember one, just going for context, like maybe a year ago, where Andrea came to one of the commission meetings, and so it's not having input as far as directing or facilitating, but it's like, hey, that's a good question. Is this even possible versus not wasting? Because it's all created, especially when we're doing notes for definition, but like being respectful of everybody's time to get the most out of it and not going down a rabbit hole where we're not getting notes, but it's like an impossibility within the system. And just being like, hey, come back to this, or just knowing, is this possible? Duly noted. I don't know. But not to dictate the conversation or to...
Okay, or to set up, to your earlier point, set up barriers that this body does not need to have to, this body would need to push against, so.
In the early days of CARE, right after it was more of a community-centered committee, not staff-centered. And we were the ones doing the work of this, like getting together. We had separate little committees, and, we would have worked on the statement, and this committee might have, and then brought it back to the full CARE committee for a discussion. But in the last couple of years, it's become more of this, seems like more staff oriented, right? I mean, staff directed or whatever, and staff doing a lot more of the work that CARE used to do as a committee. So I don't know if that's the way all the committees work, and it's just fallen into that because all the other committees work that way. But it's very, very different from those of us who started on CARE and had a lot more input into actually doing the work and then presenting it. And then the staff put input and then presenting it to the commission. Even the community members presented it to the commission. That's one reason we had a co-chair, a community co-chair. But
Was that happening too, like before it was a
definitely
committee?
Before it was CARE.
Because
when it was our
that's
team.
the
But
thing.
even in the beginning of CARE, it was.
Oh, okay.
Even in the
Because like
beginning.
anything would have to be public, right? All of the subcommittee meetings
Right.
and stuff like that would have to be publicly noticed, and like the constraints with that, like that was, yeah.
Yeah, we didn't, in that iteration.
But we didn't have a
we
commissioner
didn't-
with us, when we
We
would
didn't
have our
have that
sub-meetings.
restriction until we became a committee of the commission, so. And so, I mean, yes, early on, we were still able to do some things, but it began to be peeled away over time.
I do think it's worth clarifying how the sunshine laws apply to community members that are sitting on committees. Also, to your point, it is not my desire to be in the center of this whatsoever. I think my perspective has been, is there work that we can do that would support the work that you do, so we don't ask you to do more free labor outside of this time?
Can I ask about the last time we talked about and this relates maybe to next steps, but like the possibility of having a drive, a drive that with documents, like the historical documents and maybe some of these things that you've provided. And I think we talked about it in the context of like orientation or welcoming new members. And I wonder if that is still possible. I will say, have a drive, for commissioners, and I have a folder for CARE that has all the historical documents and minutes that I have from the past several years, which I could copy. I mean, I don't know. It's like a Google Drive, but I just don't know, like, as we go through this, like, is there, because that was mentioned before, and it could function both. I mean, I know we talked about, I think Lydia was talking about like having a table of contents and like really organizing it, which I am super into that idea too, But I didn't know if that had been done or if that's something that we could do as we work through this process.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Maybe we need to propose all of this to legal. Yeah, and
it's one of those things too. We've talked about it where it's like we could have PDFs, but it's a slippery slope when you have a working document together, because that goes to what we were trying to do, be efficiently and have an open within the Sunshine Laws, have communication where you all could talk to each other. But that working document would, for me, I'm not a lawyer. Josiah has been and is.
Let's just ask legal.
Yeah, and I think if we can present it to them before we meet again, then that way they know exactly what our concerns are coming in, and we don't put them on the spot like, so what do y'all think?
To be fair too, they have okayed the drive, like which we use for commissioners. So it would be the collaborative document that we would want approval, but I don't see any reason. I mean, if they approved the drive for commissioners, I'm sure we could have our,
I think one thing, I do want to kind of get back to making sure we're doing our due diligence to our agenda. I do like part of the CARE guidelines now talks about consensus, and I realize like we don't necessarily have to vote on our decision to move forward in an official way, but it would be good for us to have, verbal consensus. Like, for example, Josiah's, idea about taking what we've done today, allowing staff to maybe wordsmith it a little bit and send it back to us kind of as am I hearing you all correctly? I like that idea, but I want to make sure that we do have consensus if that's kind of the next step.
I like the idea.
No. Well, I guess, yes, you would send it to us as an email, but it would be, from my understanding, staff would work to take these notes and basically compile them into what they're hearing us say as a definition. They would send it to us prior to the next meeting, and then at the next meeting, it would probably show up as an action item for us to make changes to in real time based on our notes, and then, adopt it at that meeting as an action item. I think that's what I'm hearing.
That's good.
Cool. That makes me feel good. I think we've probably kind of finished with the equity and anti-racism definitions for today, if I'm hearing correctly. Not finished, but yeah, thank you all. I think that was really interesting. I'm already seeing things. I'm like, can we add this? But I'll save my thoughts. Next is prioritizing goals for fiscal year 25. I think we've alluded to some of this throughout the day's meeting, but I do want to have some space. I know one thing that we've discussed is specifically taking a look at the CARE guidelines. I think it seems like we're all in agreement that, or it feels to me that we're all in agreement that we need to have a look at the guidelines and our goals for CARE, and how we're specifically going to have an impact within the Arts Commission, and what that looks like. So I would think one of our goals would be to review the CARE guidelines, and officially appoint a community co-chair upon doing that. But yeah, I will stop talking now and allow input.
So I came in late, and you were saying that we were postponing choosing a chair until we had more members. Is that right?
Oh, no. So
okay. I misunderstood.
we decided that at this time we're in a stage where there needs to be realignment within the CARE committee. We recognize that the dynamic of CARE, as you pointed out in your example of it was intended that the community is kind of at the forefront and leading in this work. And that is the point of having a co-chair. So we want to take this definition potentially and reevaluate and realign ourselves as we're having new members, and kind of trying to figure out what exactly that looks like and have consensus there before we ask someone else to come back into the fold or come into the fold to lead in that co-chair role. So just kind of clarifying their responsibilities before we ask them to do the work.
So for number 3, are we creating a list, or are we going to table for the next meeting?
Yeah, I thought pretty short, and I'm realizing it's not short at all. How do you all feel? I mean, I want there to be, outcomes, but I also recognize that we cannot just breeze through things in the intent of getting things checked off.
And our guiding document is, that's going to take some moving through in and of itself. So,
do we maybe prioritize our goal to, pending our adoption of an equity definition, anti-racism definition, maybe we evaluate Metro Arts equity statement as well? I'm adding to the list here, but
So my question would be, if we're meeting every other month, we probably have 2 more meetings this year, not to get into the holidays, maybe 3 max, right?
yes,
Ish.
and maybe
Yeah.
that is a question. Do we want to have more meetings to get this done?
I would be up for that. I think that way we can have a beefier set of goals to work on this year, as opposed to maybe getting the guidelines set and getting a co-chair.
I think at this stage too, the good thing about us having a smaller committee right now is that we probably can do better. It's easier to schedule. So maybe do we, at this meeting, state our intentions to meet in August? Does that feel good with everyone?
Yeah, we met monthly until this last year and a half.
Just throwing that out there as well. Is this a good time? I can see it in Josiah's eyes of like, let's get on that. Like, as far as since we're here, what works with calendars, schedules, and working back from there. Monthly Fridays, is it, do we do it in a doodle poll? Like, I know. Just throwing it
Can I
out there.
bring food?
Yeah,
Can I bring food?
as long as it's.
Yeah, they have some food too. I'll bring dinner.
Yeah, first of all, is everyone okay with trying to meet in August? And then any specific requests regarding time? I know our intention is to be more accessible with our time and locations, and we didn't get any community members today, but I think we should keep trying, keep kind of putting that out there. This worked for me. I can't speak for everyone else, but
I would just like to add that one of the challenges in getting community members is time. And very often, some community members don't have jobs where they are allowed to get off without losing pay. And so that's been a real challenge with the composition of Metro commissions and boards, because they typically meet during the day. Because if you are a managerial person, after 5 o'clock, you want to go be with your family or whatever else. So I totally appreciate it and applaud each of you for making the sacrifice to come at this late hour on a Friday. To me, that demonstrates your commitment, and the extent to which we can keep that in mind will be very valuable. The other thing is, this place is somewhat off the beaten path for a lot of people who may not have cars and rely on public transportation. And I always think of libraries, but they close at 6 on Friday. And so there are a lot of things that we have to keep in mind to be accessible and to be, but the time, if it works for people after a normal work day, obviously people on second and third shift probably aren't even thinking about volunteering for stuff like this. But I just applaud you for making that effort. And I mean, I think the you is almost 100% for membership, or, so that's really good. And maybe we can explore other venues that may be more central and accessible by other than your own personal private vehicle.
I know this is something we talked about in the last couple meetings, and it is definitely the intention to not continue to only meet here, and that's something that I will collaborate with Vivian on. It does get tricky, like you said, with the time, because we are restricted to meeting at Metro buildings, where IT has access. Does a 5 to 7 meeting work well? And if this is a time that works well for the community members present, is there a different day that the libraries are open later that we could go, or?
Monday through Thursdays, they're open till 8.
Okay.
And Fridays, they open till 6, and Saturday it may be 5, and Sunday it's 2 to 5.
And I'm guessing we can do a doodle with staff and do the email, but just, I guess the big thing, bring it back, is that August month, that we will meet next month, if that's the thing to work from.
I would just, if we can move it out of a Friday, because of a lot of the arts programming happening on the weekends. So maybe a Tuesday, Monday, Wednesday. I like the 5 to 7 slot. And if we could look into community centers too, because I think they're open until maybe 9. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did that for several of our meetings. That was a good way to have it.
Well, and is that, I mean, that would be accessible for Metro ITS, but we were talking about that before, I mean, right now for the last, feels like forever, but the last year, we've had every meeting, every committee meeting being recorded. Is that something that's going to go on, do you know, Dr. Coleman, or
I don't know.
just minutes and
all
stuff?
we know
Yeah.
is that it's a requirement right now, and
Yeah.
we just get informed that that's the rule.
And not to hide from it or run away from it, just that helps that accessibility with going to other spaces. And like we will continue to do minutes, we can do things and record it and all that stuff, but not with ITS if that's the case.
Well, I think it sounds like we've got a plan to talk about our goals for fiscal year 25. I don't think we've prioritized all of them, but I think meeting more regularly will help us continue to move along in the work. Are there any other new and old business items that need to be addressed?
In August.
I've just created a drive with everything I have and shared with the three of you. So if you want to look at it, we can look at organization and then share it with other people. Also, Dr. Coleman, we were talking about making a binder for new, like an ongoing thing, materials for people as we think about onboarding new commissioners, but that would be part of it too. Like, what would we want included in our section? So.
Thank you. Are there any other new business items or old business items? All right. Well, with that, I will waste no more time, and this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Trey. Thank you.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.